Today's story begins in the sewers of London, where two workers named Arthur and George are inspecting the piping system. Arthur has been doing this job for many years, and he actually quite enjoys it. But George is constantly surprised because he is here mainly just to complete his community service. Suddenly, from deep within the sewer tunnels, a sound like a woman's scream echoes out. Upon hearing it, George immediately becomes terrified, but Arthur reassures him that in tunnels like these, strange echoing sounds occur frequently and it is nothing too unusual. Afterwards, the two continue walking forward. But just a moment later, Arthur suddenly stops because he sees a very strange hole on the wall, as if it leads to a new tunnel. Arthur says in surprise that he has worked in these tunnels for 20 years, but has never seen this passage before. That very fact causes his curiosity to grow. Therefore, Arthur takes his flashlight and slowly steps inside that mysterious tunnel. Suddenly, his foot gets caught on something, causing him to almost fall. At that moment, the light from the flashlight for a brief second shines upon something that looks like a human being. Outside, George begins to feel restless because Arthur has been inside for quite a long time and has not yet returned. He calls Arthur's name many times, but there is absolutely no response from within. Finally, George gathers all his courage and steps into that mysterious tunnel. After walking a short distance, he sees Arthur lying on the ground. But Arthur at this moment is shaking violently, so terrified that he is almost unable to speak normally. Right then, from the deep darkness, an injured girl stumbles out. Her entire body is covered in blood, and her voice weakly begs for help. But immediately after, some invisible force suddenly grabs the girl and pulls her violently back into the darkness. Afterwards, the story shifts to a young girl named Kate. At this time, Kate is attending an office event and is looking for her friend Gemma. There is also a male colleague of hers there. This man constantly tries to flirt with Kate, but Kate completely ignores him, even making it very clear that she has no interest in him whatsoever. Later, Kate leaves the party and goes out to the street to head home. It is quite late then, she cannot catch a taxi, so she decides to go by subway. To buy a ticket, Kate first goes to an ATM to withdraw money. Nearby, there is a man sitting on the curb asking her for a few coins, but Kate responds with a sarcastic tone, saying that ATMs do not dispense coins. If he wants to ask for coins, he should sit near a public phone booth. However, very soon after, fate forces her to realize her own rudeness, because the ticket machine does not accept her large denomination bill. Right at that moment, a homeless girl standing nearby with a dog notices Kate's awkward situation. The girl tells Kate that she has a subway ticket and can sell it back at a cheap price. Each ticket is less than £2. But seeing the girl's pitiful circumstances, Kate feels a bit soft-hearted. Therefore, instead of paying just the exact ticket price, she gives the girl £20 directly, and then Kate goes down to the platform. The screen displays that the last train is still 8 minutes away. So she takes a few sips of her drink and leans her head back to rest for a moment. But during that time, she accidentally falls asleep. When Kate opens her eyes and wakes up, there is no one left on the platform, and the announcement screen has turned off. She hurriedly runs up to the turnstile area. But it is then that she discovers the station has closed and she is trapped inside. Kate screams loudly for help. But at that time, there is no one around. Furthermore, her phone battery is completely dead and Kate begins to panic. Right then, she hears the sound of a train approaching from a distance. She immediately runs back to the platform to catch the train in time. But she does not realize that at the same time, a man silently boards the rear carriage. At this moment, Kate feels more relieved, but just a little while later, before the train can reach the next station, it suddenly stops and gets stuck midway. In a fit of anger, Kate walks through each carriage, approaches the driver's cabin, and bangs hard on the door to call the driver. But inside, the train driver is no longer able to answer because he was attacked by someone earlier. After that, the lights in the train suddenly go out, and darkness covers everywhere. In that night, Kate sees a man holding a flashlight standing in the last carriage. She thinks it might be a subway employee, so she approaches and begins to complain about the station being closed and leaving her trapped. But the man says nothing, only quietly moves toward her. Seeing this, Kate feels that something is very unusual and immediately runs away. But while running, she loses her balance and falls to the floor. As the man approaches, Kate realizes he is the colleague she met at the party. He laughs out loud and immediately turns on the lights in the train, then mockingly says he was just joking. But very soon after, the situation becomes serious because Kate realizes this man has been following her all this time. Just a moment later, his attitude completely changes. He begins to behave rudely and intends to assault Kate. But instead of showing fear toward his actions, Kate mocks him, which makes him angry and he suddenly lunges to attack her. He pushes Kate to the ground. Then, just as he leans down close to her, some strange force suddenly grabs him and pulls him violently out of the train carriage. From outside, painful screams and the sound of a violent struggle echo. After a few moments, everything becomes silent again, and then that man reappears. But this time, his condition is extremely terrible. He can barely stand. Immediately after, something grabs him once more and drags him into the darkness. Witnessing all of this, Kate is terrified to the extreme and immediately runs through the train carriages. Then she hides in a rear compartment. But just a few seconds later, she hears the footsteps of someone approaching. At this point, she has nowhere left to hide, so Kate opens the back door, steps outside, and runs along the tracks until she reaches a platform. Upon reaching the platform, she tries to use a public phone to call for help, but she still has no coins, so she cannot call anyone. Utterly exhausted, Kate sits down on the ground for a while, panting to regain her composure. Right then, she hears a sound nearby like a door opening. Hearing that noise, Kate is terrified again, thinking that the dangerous thing has found her. But looking closely, she sees in front of her is the dog that was with the ticket-selling girl earlier. Seeing it, Kate feels a bit more relieved. She thinks that perhaps the girl is also nearby, so she slowly follows the dog. The dog goes through a small door into the interior, which is a restricted area of the station. Inside, there are two homeless people named Jimmy and Mandy sleeping. Seeing Kate, Jimmy suddenly wakes up and asks in astonishment what she is doing here. Kate says she knows Mandy, but Jimmy explains that his girlfriend Mandy currently cannot speak because she is under the influence of various stimulants. Then Kate tells Jimmy everything that happened on the train, how her colleague tried to force and assault her, and how an invisible power grabbed him and pulled him into the darkness. But Jimmy is not too worried about that. He says that whoever punished that man probably did nothing wrong. Then Jimmy says that in this station, there is only one single guard. That person sits in the control room, but he does not interfere in their business because there is a kind of silent agreement between them. Hearing this, Kate is very angry because Jimmy does not take her words seriously at all, but Kate tries to stay calm and offers to pay Jimmy £50 if he takes her to the guard. As soon as he hears about money, Jimmy's decision immediately changes. He agrees to lead her to the control room. The two begin to walk through the dark passages of the station, but right then, the noise of large rats in the station wakes Mandy up. When she opens her eyes, she sees her dog is also in the middle of that pack of rats, so she immediately runs toward it to save it. But suddenly Mandy freezes in place because in front of her is something so terrifying it leaves her stunned. Immediately after, she lets out a blood-curdling scream of horror. However, at that time, Kate and Jimmy have gone quite far, so they do not hear Mandy's scream at all. While continuing on the way, Jimmy keeps walking while complaining about his hardships and then starts to argue with Kate. Right then, someone suddenly calls Kate's name. It turns out to be her colleague. At this moment, he is crying and crawling in extreme pain along the tracks toward them. Seeing that scene, Kate is terrified and tells Jimmy that he must help get the man out. But Jimmy does not want to help someone who once intended to force another. Then Kate promises to pay him another £50. Hearing about money, despite still being angry, Jimmy finally agrees, cursing that man while stepping toward him. But when Jimmy looks closer and sees his horrific condition, he immediately understands that what Kate told him earlier was the truth. However, Jimmy alone cannot lift him up, so Kate also has to help. The two together help him up and struggle to bring him back up to the platform. Right then, the dog Ray suddenly appears. Jimmy sees traces of blood on its body and fur. This causes him to panic violently and he immediately runs to find Mandy. But when he returns to the place where he left Mandy, she has disappeared. Not only that, on the station floor, there is a long trail of blood leading inside a closing gate. Jimmy is extremely scared but still tries to stay calm and follows that blood trail. Even so, when he reaches the very end of the blood trail, he still does not see Mandy anywhere. Meanwhile, Kate is still taking care of her injured colleague. Right then, she sees an emergency button on the wall. Seeing it, Kate realizes that this is the internal communication system connected directly to the control room, so she immediately presses the button. At this time, the guard is sitting in the control room leisurely solving a crossword puzzle. When a call comes in, he seems a bit annoyed but still picks up the phone. As soon as Kate hears the guard's voice, a glimmer of hope sparks in her heart. She quickly says that there is a man lying here in a near-death condition, but the guard is skeptical and asks if that person is also one of the homeless people. Kate immediately waves her hand in front of the camera to show him that she does not belong to that group of people. However, the guard says that he does not see any injured person on the camera, so he tells Kate that if there really is an injured person, then bring that person in front of the camera for him to see. Hearing this, Kate returns to the colleague's spot to drag him in front of the camera, but when she gets close, she discovers he is dead. Infuriated, Kate drags his body to the middle of the platform and screams loudly, asking if even at this level, the guard still doesn't see this as serious. Seeing that corpse, the guard finally understands the severity of the situation. But as soon as he turns his chair around, he discovers the control room is suddenly full of rats crawling everywhere. He tries to ward them off, but right at that moment, someone from behind suddenly grabs his head. Through the emergency communication system, Kate hears the final screams of the guard and understands that her last hope of being rescued has completely vanished. Afterwards, Kate finds Jimmy and asks him if there is another way out. At this time, Jimmy is extremely terrified, and to reduce the pain, he has injected something into his body. Even so, he still agrees to continue going with Kate. At the same time, it can be seen that the colleague's body is being dragged by some force into the tunnel on the left, while Kate and Jimmy go toward the tunnel on the right. When the two reach the middle of the tunnel, Kate hears a sound echoing from afar. Listening more closely, both realize it is the sound of a train running toward them. Realizing that, they immediately run very fast to an adjacent platform. But the train stops a distance away from them. Seeing this, Kate becomes even more terrified because she suspects that the person operating the train might be the killer. Hearing Kate say that, Jimmy gets angry and decides he will face the one who attacked Mandy. He tells Kate to take the dog and run away from here immediately. Initially, Kate actually runs away, but when she hears Jimmy stepping inside the train and loudly threatening someone, she turns back. In the meantime, Jimmy sees the guard's body and approaches to examine it. Kate also manages to run there just in time, but right then, someone suddenly grabs Jimmy's head and pulls him upward. Jimmy struggles with all his might to escape, but he cannot resist for long and is eventually killed by the attacker. Witnessing that scene, Kate is terrified to the point of collapse and immediately runs away. She tries to climb up via the platform path, but due to losing her balance, she falls straight down into the sewer area below. There she sees Arthur's body in a state of horrific devastation. While terrified, Kate avoids the debris to continue moving forward. Finally, she finds a ladder. Climbing up from the ladder, she enters an area of the station that looks like an old record room or storage room. Afterwards, she runs from room to room, trying to find someone who can help her. But suddenly all the lights in the area go out. Kate still has a flashlight in her hand. But she knows that if she turns it on, the killer might discover her location. Therefore, she hides behind some boxes, turns off the flashlight, and waits quietly. For a long time, the surroundings are completely silent, making Kate think that perhaps the dangerous thing is no longer near her. Thinking so, she turns on the flashlight herself once more. But as soon as the light shines forward, the killer's face appears right in front of her. And in the very next moment, everything sinks completely into darkness. A while later, the killer appears in a room that looks like a prison cell. From there, he goes out and approaches another area where there are many cages half submerged in sewer water. In one cage, George is being locked up. Afterwards, the killer goes to another cage where there is a corpse lying inside. He pulls that corpse up and brings it upstairs. After he leaves, it is then revealed that Kate is also being locked in another cage. Kate begins to talk to George. Kate notices there is a small gap beneath the bars of the cage. This makes her realize that if they dive down through the water below, they can swim to the adjacent cage. Kate tells George that if he goes through that way, he can reach the cage that is open. But George immediately refuses because he does not know how to swim and does not want to take such a risk. Therefore, Kate decides to try it herself. She takes a deep breath and dives under the water. George looks at her with hopeful eyes, and just a few moments later, Kate emerges from inside the next cage, proving her hypothesis was correct. At this point, George is more excited and says they only have to pass through one more cage. But right then, the killer returns at the doorway. At that time, Kate is preparing to dive into the water again. Seeing him, George pretends to be dead to distract him. Thanks to that, Kate swims to the open cage and escapes. Afterwards, she silently approaches the killer from behind and uses her shoe heel to stab him hard in the eye. The killer screams violently in pain and writhes. Taking this opportunity, Kate immediately opens the cage and frees George. Then both run through various tunnels and finally reach an area that looks like an abandoned hospital. In one room, they see Mandy. She is tied tightly to a chair, her whole body covered in blood. Seeing that sight, Kate is extremely terrified and tells George to go check if Mandy is still alive. But at that time, George has lost all his courage. He does not dare to step too close, only standing from afar to slightly shake Mandy's leg, and then concludes that she is dead. Hearing this, Kate almost breaks down and begins to cry. She feels that perhaps she herself is partly responsible for Mandy falling into this state. But right while they are saying those things, Mandy with great difficulty lifts her head up. She tries to attract their attention and even reaches out her hand for help. However, at that time, Kate and George have moved on without turning their heads back to look. Continuing forward, they reach a door with an exit sign. But when the door opens, in front of them is only a solid wall, making the hope that just sparked immediately vanish. Right then, Kate sees a few loose bricks at the bottom of the wall. Upon closer observation, she realizes behind those bricks is a hidden narrow tunnel passage. Realizing this, Kate quickly begins to remove each brick, trying to create a hole large enough for both to crawl through. At the same time, George hears a sound like metal clashing, making him understand that the killer has come very close. Therefore, George immediately kicks the weak part of the wall hard and breaks it, then tells Kate to quickly crawl into that hole. But right then, from the direction of the hospital-like room, a weak sound echoes. It is Mandy. She is still alive. Hearing that noise, the killer immediately ignores Kate and George, no longer pursuing them but turning back toward Mandy. There, he begins to play with medical instruments as if he himself were truly a doctor. After that, he goes near the sink and tries to turn on the faucet. Water does not come out, but he still performs motions as if he were washing his hands. Then he puts on a filthy apron, puts on gloves, picks up a sharp instrument, and prepares to perform a horrific surgery. That horrific surgery begins and Mandy's screams echo so violently that Kate, who is running in the tunnel, can hear them. Kate immediately panics and asks George if Mandy is really dead. George freezes for a few seconds, as if he himself is not sure, but finally still says yes, and then warns that he will not turn back to check if Mandy is still alive. Afterwards, Kate and George escape from the tunnel and reach an old subway station that has been abandoned. There they see the dog Ray being locked in a cage. Looking at the condition of this place, it can be clearly seen that the killer has lived there for a very long time. Right then, Kate sees a picture frame. In the photo is that doctor standing next to a small child. Looking closer, she realizes that child is actually the childhood image of the killer. Immediately after, a loud noise like something just falling echoes from outside. At this time, due to fear and anger, George almost completely breaks down. He begins to smash surrounding objects and screams loudly that he cannot endure all of this anymore. But after a while, George tries to regain his composure. Right then, the killer quietly appears behind him and suddenly grabs George. George immediately uses all his strength to wrestle him to the ground and repeatedly punches him. During that time, Kate picks up an iron pipe nearby and prepares to hit the killer. But right at that moment, for the first time, he speaks, begging her not to hurt him. But immediately after, he himself provokes Kate and tells her to kill him. Kate falls into a state of confusion, not knowing what to do, causing the iron pipe in her hand to fall. In that very moment, the killer suddenly grabs George's head and slams it hard against a saw placed nearby. Witnessing this scene, Kate screams in terror. At this point she understands clearly that his next target is her, so she panics and runs into the tunnels. A while later, Kate sees from afar a train running, and she thinks that perhaps she still has a chance of survival. She immediately runs very fast toward it, but the killer suddenly reaches out his hand, making her fall. He is toying with her, intentionally giving her a chance to run away just to turn her into prey in his hunting game. Finally, the killer sits down in front of Kate and uses the hook in his hand to touch her face. Right then, Kate sees on his hand he is wearing a hospital bracelet on which is written the name Craig. That is also the very name she saw near the cradle earlier. Kate then asks him if his name is Craig. Upon hearing that question, the killer immediately becomes enraged and punches Kate hard, but that very blow pushes Kate closer to the sharp hook lying nearby. She takes this opportunity to pick it up and uses all her strength to stab Craig straight in the neck. Kate realizes that hook is connected to a chain. She immediately comes up with an idea and begins to pull the other end of the chain off the wall. Then, she pulls the chain as if it were tied to Craig's neck, dragging him along behind her toward the high voltage area, and then she throws the end of the chain into it. Initially, nothing happens, but right then, a train passes by and runs over the chain, causing Craig's neck to be tightened and torn more severely. He falls to the ground, trying to breathe for a few moments, but then his movements gradually stop completely. Kate stands there watching him until she is completely sure that he is dead. Afterwards, Kate slowly walks along the tracks and finally reaches a brightly lit platform. She is completely exhausted, so she sits down on the ground right there. A while later, the dog also appears and runs to sit in her lap. By this time it is morning, people begin to enter the station to catch the subway. At the same time, a well-dressed man sees Kate, thinking she is a homeless person, so he places a few coins in front of her. Seeing that scene, Kate suddenly bursts out laughing. It is as if after all the fear, pain, and horror she just went through, her spirit has completely broken down. And this horror story also ends here.